Yeah. Hi, Facebook. Hello. We're here from Act4Eco, and you might be seeing this on the page of Act4Eco or some of our partner pages.
Yeah, and welcome. So this is a webinar that we are hosting because today is International Ozone Layer Day. And Act4Eco is about climate change and mitigating the effects of climate change and what you can do to be an energy conscious consumer. And my name is Charlotte Koldbye. I am a science journalist. I work here at the Danish Board of Technology, and my co-host here is Emma Kierkegaard.
Hello.
She's a project manager. And we have Sotiris Papadelis, who is also part of Act4Eco. He's an energy expert, and we're going to get expert advice from him later on. And then we also have an ozone layer expert from the UN, from UNEP, Liazzat Rabbiosi. Welcome. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Hello.
For those of you who are not, maybe you weren't even born in 1985, in the mid-80s, people were talking about the ozone layer. Suddenly we discovered that we talked about we had this ozone layer, and they found an enormous, gigantic hole in the ozone layer at the around the Antarctic. And then some atmospheric chemists, they found out that this hairspray with propellant in it, they were the culprits. They were the cause of the hole in the ozone layer. And also all the cooling agents in refrigerators and in air conditioning devices, etc. And it took a long time to actually accept that we as human beings, we had this impact on this scale at an atmospheric level. We had this impact, and we were the cause of the big hole in the ozone layer. And also that we also had to accept the fact that if we continued using these gases, all life forms on Earth would die, because if we didn't have the ozone layer, 100% of the dangerous rays from the sun, the UV rays, would just kill all life forms on Earth. In 1986, the Montreal Protocol was signed, and a phasing out of the damaging gases were started, especially in the Western world, and the developing world had, you can talk more about that, Liazzat, but the developing world had didn't have to act as quickly at phasing out these gases. And the world came together in a joint course for the ozone layer. And the substitutes were developed quickly, and we didn't stop using refrigerators or hairspray or air cons. We found something else to use. So many climate activists also see the Montreal Protocol as a story of hope, of taking responsibility and taking action and acting as a, how can you say, at a political international level. We couldn't have done that with individualistic choices. We had to take a joint choice and joint action at a global level. So today, maybe you now, Liazzat Rabbiosi, you can tell us a bit more about the story about the Montreal Protocol and how it is working still, because until yesterday, I thought the hole in the sky was fixed, and you told me that unfortunately it's not the case.
Yes, thank you very much, Charlotte. I'm very pleased to be in this webinar and to represent the Ozone Secretariat, which is hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme. And the Ozone Secretariat manages and provides support to the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer and the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. So that there's two important multilateral environmental agreements, which you rightly pointed out, are largely seen as successful intergovernmental mechanisms for addressing an environmental issue. And this issue is depletion of the ozone layer, which is caused by the human activity. So in the 1980s, it was discovered that there is a large hole in the ozone concentration over the Antarctic, which then led to scientific assessments and monitoring, which led to identify the culprits as the gases that we very actively use in many products on a daily basis, and mainly the refrigeration, air conditioning equipment, but also, as you pointed out, in aerosol, in foam, for example, it's used as the...
Please.
How is the connection? Do you hear me?
Yes, it's fine. We can hear you.
Okay, yes. So this the names of these culprits, as you said, are the chemical substances, man-made chemical substances, which we know by the abbreviation CFCs. And that was one of the most powerful green ozone depleting substance. In the 1985, based on these scientific discoveries, the international community, politicians and heads of the states, they came together to sign the Vienna Convention for the protection of the ozone layer. And as you can count, today and this year, we celebrate the 35th anniversary of this convention. And this convention provides a platform for cooperation, mainly in the area of the scientific research, because this is very important to understand how the ozone layer happens and the effects of these substances on the ozone layer, as well as the other scientific interactions that happened of the ozone layer and of the ozone gas in the stratosphere. And later on, it was decided that it's important to also take actions to phase out the use of these substances from our economy, because these substances are used, at least it's counted, more than 200 different economic sectors of the economy. So then that is when the Montreal Protocol was signed in 1987 on the 16th of September and in the city of Montreal. That's why it has its name. And today it's the 33rd anniversary of this protocol. And 16th of September since then is celebrated as an International Day for the Preservation of the Ozone Layer, or as we call it also, World Ozone Day. So most of the countries, because it's a universally ratified convention and protocol, all the countries that are member states of the United Nations celebrate this day, as for example, Denmark and other European countries through this kind of event. And yes, the protocol, the difference between the convention and the protocol, that protocol is a legally binding instrument or treaty for the countries. When they sign up to this treaty, they take specific obligations that they need to fulfill in the eyes of the international community. And these obligations relate to the phasing out of these substances. And as you, Charlotte, rightly pointed out, CFCs, we officially stopped using them from 2010, but CFCs have been replaced by other chemicals. Maybe Anna, you can show them again. HCFC.
Yeah. So actually the thing is, I just forgot that while you were talking, they cannot see while you're talking, they don't see my picture. So actually nobody saw the pictures.
Ah, okay.
So, but here is the CFC. And this is like the one which is the worst for the ozone depletion. And then there is the new ones that it has been substituted with, HCFC.
Yeah, hydrochlorofluorocarbons. These are substances that have been used to replace the most potent ozone depleting substances such as CFCs. And developed countries, they go in a more accelerated way to phase out or to remove the use of these chemicals in the industries, while developing countries, they go at a slower pace. So they're supposed to phase out or completely remove the use of these chemicals by 2030. And what is interesting about the Montreal Protocol, that it's very much based on the common but differentiated approach, meaning that all the specific conditions and context of the countries are taken into account when these phase-out schedules with the countries are decided and agreed upon. And also interesting aspect about the Montreal Protocol that it has specific mechanism for funding the efforts of developing countries to phase out these substances, the use of these substances. So altogether, this scientific underpinning that it's very much this convention and this protocol emerges from these scientific discoveries and this international consensus, as well as the specific industry that it's focusing on, the use of these refrigerants, as well as differentiated approaches that allows developing countries to also comply with their obligations with the support of developed countries, donor countries. And together all constitute in a way success of this treaty.
I have a question for you, Liazzat. So how many countries on a worldwide basis has agreed to phase out these gases?
So the Montreal Protocol is ratified by 197 countries.
Which is all, how many countries are there in the world?
In the UN, the same amount, so it's a universal ratified.
It's a universal. Okay, that's good. Yeah. We're also talking we're talking a lot about this, taking an individual stance, an individual choice. But as we can see with the ozone layer, I mean, I could throw out my hairspray, but it really didn't matter if we didn't act with 199 countries. When we talk about climate change, there has been so much debate about whether it's caused by human activity or not, and a lot of countries has used that as an excuse or a cause not to adhere to, for example, the Paris Agreement. What we're trying to do with Act4Eco is that we're also trying to activate all these individuals who really want to do something. So we're going to, so Sotiris is our expert. So we have expert advice, and the platform will also create a community. How do you see this community building? Do you have something similar when we're talking about phasing out these gases in the developing countries?
Yes, very much. I think the whole community, Ozone, as we call it, Ozone community, is celebrating this day today. And if you just Google the World Ozone Day or International Day of Ozone Layer Preservation, you will see a number of references to different activities that countries undertaking. And in the countries as well, there are many activities, events are happening at different levels. So this is together all we call it Ozone community. And I think it's one of the successes also of the Montreal Protocol that this community has come together and at very different levels, at the state level, at international level, regional level, state level, and also at the grassroots level, making the contribution to the implementation of the Montreal Protocol and achieving the commitments that the state take by ratifying the Montreal Protocol.
Thank you. Sotiris, will you please, I have just introduced you very briefly. Could you tell us a bit more about your role in the Act4Eco project and your background?
Yes. Okay, let's start first regarding the Eco2 project itself. So the project is based on this, it's actually two tiers. The first is that if you want people to do some small things in the daily life that can improve energy efficiency, can improve sustainability, it's better to provide information and knowledge, let's call it energy know-how, why you should do something and what are the different steps to do it, that just provide recommendations or tips. So one aspect is this, providing knowledge. It's something between e-learning and fast and easy to implement recommendations. It's not heavily and only e-learning, but it's not only recommendations. And since you mentioned my role, this is mainly about validating the content that actually makes sense from a technical perspective. And the other tier is the community building aspect. Because, okay, knowing something doesn't mean that you will act. To act, you need motivation. And the idea is that creating communities and engaging people into small teams that build up to communities is a way to engage people and motivate them to do things. So these two different aspects are under the umbrella of the Eco2 project.
And what is your background?
I'm a mechanical engineer.
So, and you have specialized in energy. What is?
For the most part of my professional life, I have been involved with aspects that are related to energy in general, and the last years to energy efficiency. Energy
efficiency. Is that only, so you are based in Greece, is that only at a national level in Greece, or do you have sort of an expertise in more or less all of Europe?
No, it's, there's no difference. Energy efficiency in Greece and energy efficiency in Europe in general, it's not that much of a difference. What makes somewhat the difference is the regulatory aspects. And it's not that Greece is unique, but Greece implements some aspects, some specific policies. You can find these policies in other countries too, but there are countries in Europe and the EU that follow a bit different approach. So in terms of policy and regulation, let's say that we have a European perspective.
Yeah, Anna, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I have a question for Sotiris. From someone who forgot to write their name in the text message. If you send some questions via text or you can send it to email team@act4eco.eu, or you can send it on Act4Eco's Facebook page, but now I got one on text. The number is also written in the description here. So we're asked, what can you do? How can you act energy efficient if you don't have control over your energy sources? For instance, if you live in a rented apartment in the middle of Copenhagen. I guess it's the same in Athens. Yeah.
What you can do in terms of, okay, energy efficiency can be regarded as two things. The canonical interpretation is reducing energy consumption. Mm. But you can expand it a bit and talk about producing energy as well. If we're talking about reducing energy consumption, okay, the best you can do in a rented apartment is related to your equipment, everyday equipment. Maybe the heating and cooling system, maybe. Okay, it's a well-known problem, actually. This split incentive between the landlord and the tenant, that investing in things that require a lot of time to bring back the expenditure, for instance, improving insulation, etc. It needs more than just individual actions. So you can focus on replacing old equipment with new one, and especially if you're talking about heating and cooling. Cooling in Copenhagen doesn't make sense. Okay, heating. If we are talking about producing energy, that's a bit different, because if you don't have the access and capability to install things on your rooftop, for instance, energy communities is actually a very interesting initiative, a concept that has been, it has started to appear in the regulatory framework. Even in Greece now we're talking about energy communities, and the idea that you can invest in something that's not installed on your house, it's installed somewhere else, but you either get part of the benefits or credits that are subtracted from your energy consumption.
Can you be a bit more, so what is energy communities? Can you be a bit more specific? Energy communities,
the overall term means coalitions where you have citizens, but also municipalities and private companies that all of them can invest in renewable energy, and the benefits from the renewable energy, the economic benefits, I mean, come back to the subscribers, to the investors. In some cases, energy communities go hand by hand with this idea of virtual net metering, which practically means that you invest in some installation, this installation creates energy, and for this energy you have credits that are subtracted from your consumption. So it is as if you have consumed what you actually consume minus the part of the installation that you own. And at least in Greece, for instance, the energy communities in the virtual net metering greatly overlap. So if you want to follow this route, there is already a regulatory framework that creates these credits. It's an option. It's an option where you cannot do something on your house.
I have a question for Liazzat. Liazzat, do you have anything like that when we're talking about the ozone layer? So, for example, could you imagine that a big apartment building, instead of having individual cooling old air conditioning devices, they invested in getting a central modern day something? I don't know. Is there anything? Have you seen any initiatives like that?
Of course, one of the very important also policy actions that governments take to actually implement the Montreal Protocol and meet their commitments in line also with climate change commitments under the Paris Agreement is to awareness activities such as this one, for example, or focusing on the awareness and sensitization of the population on the actions that they can take, how they can change their behaviors. So this is one of the most important aspects because understanding creates then this motivation to have a behavioral change. And these impacts very much depend on the actions and decisions these different people, actors take in terms of use of this equipment. So it's important to understand that this equipment which use refrigerant gases, they have the most of the impacts during the use phase. These equipments are used for some time by consumers, by people in different countries, maybe a bit shorter in developed countries, but it's used, air conditioner could be used up to 25 years in the context of a hot developing country. So you can imagine the amount of impact the behavior of a person who uses air conditioner can have on the environment. So governments produce a lot of awareness products, materials that help to increase the understanding of the consumers of you and I, we also become consumers when we go to supermarkets, when we buy and choose this equipment, and also when we use this equipment in our homes. So there could be some very basic ways to reduce this, and knowing that disposal of this refrigerant is very important, needs to be done by certified experts. Also, this equipment, especially air conditioners in developing in hot countries, they need to be regularly serviced, and this is where most of the actually impacts from this in terms of emission or leakage of these refrigerant gases, ozone depleting substances, can happen if a technician who is not usually coming with maybe not a very educated background, if they're not properly trained, they can just release this gas into the atmosphere. So this things also quite important to take into account when policy mix, so specific policy infrastructure is being set up to implement Montreal Protocol and to meet commitments both on the Paris Agreement and Ozone conventions.
Okay, I have some questions, yeah, or I think it's more comments here on Facebook from Asad Mahmoud. We forget to discuss about compressor manufacturers and refrigerant manufacturers owners. Most of us are end users, and he says there should be some program to replace refrigerant gases in compressors, and it may cost less.
Yeah, it's very important points that we discuss more here, the demand side, if you like, downstream of these value chains of these systems that use refrigerants and these gases. But under the Montreal Protocol, there is quite an elaborated setup for implementation of the protocol, especially in the context of developing countries. I mentioned earlier that we have a specific fund that is designated for the implementation of the Montreal Protocol, and one of the key areas where the fund invests these funds into the conversion of the manufacturing companies into the greener technologies. So there are full range of projects where at the government level companies are selected and they receive funding to convert to the production lines, to technologies, and to design of the equipments that use more friendly environment, ozone and climate friendly gases.
Okay. Do you have any more questions?
No, but he says thanks.
All right. So when we're talking about community, I mean, going back again to the hairspray, so you can take an individual choice, and sometimes when we talk about climate change, I can sense a lot of impatience, despair, and apathy. And sometimes to conquer that, you try to do as much as you can at an individual level. So for example, you can, hang on, I just had these, so for example, there's a lot of buy nothing new, for example, use only secondhand clothes and use it so a lot longer time, for example, than the normal clothes that you would wear. Eat only food with little carbon footprint as possible. That means no red meat, and as little meat as possible. You can take a personal choice to never go on a plane again. You will never fly again. You will just stay on the continent where you are, and no cars, for example.
So we're talking about all the activists.
Yeah.
Things
and
you can
also
do.
Produce your own energy and live off grid. I mean, it can be really satisfying to know, like, for example, when I harvest, in the spring, I put potatoes in the ground, and I can harvest potatoes or rice or whatever it is, and tomatoes, and you can get more or less the same satisfaction when you produce your own energy. Sotiris, why is that not the best choice to make? I mean, it makes perfectly good sense for me.
Produce your own energy or to go off grid? I suppose you mean
both, but also go off grid.
If you have the opportunity and the capability, the space to install, for instance, photovoltaics, solar photovoltaics, why not? It's, in many cases, it's a good investment. It used to be a better investment where there was the feed-in tariff scheme where they actually paid you for the energy you produce. Now it's just energy that you can consume, and depends on the framework, the regulatory framework in different countries. Maybe the power system can act as your own battery, so you can give it and take it back, or maybe not. So you have to think about what happens to the energy that you lose, that you don't consume at the time it's generated, and how you can maximize its utilization. Assuming that the economics are there, because it's either a good alignment between the profile of the consumption, because solar PVs create something like the peaks during the noon and you don't have any energy during the nights. Assuming that this profile fits your own consumption, or that you are willing to invest in something more that actually acts as storage, then it could be a good option. It's not really individualistic. Off-grid is a different case, because off-grid, first of all, in many cases, it's probably that doesn't make economical sense.
Should we maybe just tell first what off-grid is? I'm not sure if everyone knows that.
It's the idea that you can consume all the energy you need, so you don't need the grid. And okay, maybe for small houses that are detached and maybe in the forest, makes sense. For the apartment blocks in the city, it doesn't make sense at all. For anything in the middle, it can be an expensive option. Because you have to keep in mind that you produce energy and you also pay charges for having access to the grid. You have to be 100% that you will never use the grid, so that to avoid these charges, again, depends on the country if the regulatory framework allows you to. So economically, it doesn't make much sense.
What if you look at it from a societal point of view? So for example, imagine that I want to almost go off grid. So I produce my own energy in the hope that I can mostly go off grid. But when I need to, I can just use the electricity from the grid. Why is that not a good idea from a societal point of view?
First of all, if you say that you will go off grid, but you want the option to use it at some point, then you have to pay for charges. At least this is the common sense. But the grid is an infrastructure, and it's an infrastructure that needs to be maintained. It serves a lot of people. The whole idea that you can actually go off grid and not use it at all means that all the people that still require to use it will have to bear the same cost. Now, with less people, it's more cost per user. So it's actually passing the costs to the remaining users of the grid. But okay, I would start with a question that says why the grid is so bad. It's not. When it makes economical sense for a specific building to go off grid, okay, why not? But that would be not a lot of cases. In many cases, I think it's more ideological discussion about off grid than anything else.
Okay. Maybe we should hang on. I just have to find my way in my papers here.
I have some questions.
Yes, go ahead with the questions.
Okay. So this question is for Liazzat, and she's asking about the ozone hole. If we know how is it measured?
The ozone hole is usually happening over the Antarctic in springtime, and it's measured in what we call Dobson units in terms of the ozone gas concentration. So Dobson was one of the scientists who discovered the ozone in the atmosphere and developed these instruments for measuring the concentration of this gas. And that's how it's usually measured. So usually the concentration of the ozone gas, if it goes below 240 Dobson units, then it's considered as an ozone hole. Oh. If it's higher it is, the better, of course it is. In terms of the concentration of the gas that prevents the filtering of the harmful UV radiation from the sun.
I have a follow-up question to the ozone hole. So what is the state of the ozone layer now as regards to 1987 when the protocol went into action?
So the lowest concentration of the gas was detected in 1990. And since then, because of the also largely efforts of the Montreal Protocol and phasing out of the CFC as the most potent ozone depleting substance, it has been on the trajectory of recovery. So it's been predicted that if we continue the same efforts, if we continue the phase out of remaining actually 99% of the ozone depleting substances has been already phased out from the use in the global economy.
99%. Wow.
90 in terms of its potency as well, and remaining 1% is still happening now. As I said, we have another 10 years left before we reach the full phase out of ozone depleting substances. And
you have a
ozone layer has been on the way of recovery, and it's predicted that by 2040 and by mid this century it will be recovered to its 1990 level, when it was the lowest
Anna has a picture that which she would like to show, because you can see, yeah, like this, we can see the
yes, by the need of this will supposedly will return to the same levels before the depletion has been discovered in the 1970s. But it's provided that we continue our effort in terms of the implementation of the Montreal Protocol. And also maybe I can add here that the Montreal Protocol had an important change in the recent years. In 2016, there was an amendment signed to the Montreal Protocol. It's called Kigali Amendment because it was signed in the city of Kigali, which is the capital of Rwanda. And this amendment adds another group of substances which have been used as a replacement for ozone depleting substances. We call them HFC. I think Anna, you also have another prompt for that, hydrofluorocarbons. And these substances, they are not ozone depleting. They actually have a zero ozone depleting potential, potency, the value that we use to determine to what extent this gas is actually effective in terms of destruction of the ozone layer.
So we'll just show the gases, and the other one, Anna. There it is. Go ahead, Liazzat.
So HFCs are not ozone depleting substances, but they are actually quite potent greenhouse gases. So
and that's a new connection. Yeah.
One of the important connections between the ozone layer protection and the effort to prevent the climate crisis.
Yeah. So we were talking about producing your own energy. Maybe we should go into details because that is, there are recipes on Act4Eco how you can produce your own energy. Can you tell us a bit more about these methods to produce your own energy, Sotiris, please?
Yes, in terms of what we have in ECO2 on the channel. In ECO2 we have information about solar photovoltaics.
So there's solar photovoltaics, so these are solar cells you put on your roof or anywhere else, and they produce,
they generate electricity.
Suck up the sun and produce electricity. Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's our little house.
Yes, quite common.
We have a very nice house here made by Tantan, our intern, and this is a real solar panel on the roof of the house she built.
Yeah.
And the content in ECO2 has one component that explains, let's say, the physics or the mechanics of it. The most common installations, how would the installation would look like? It's not just the panel, it's the inverters, it's the whole wiring, and then there is another part that's more about step by step that actually explains the basic calculations you should do so that you have a sense if it's economical for you, what size solar panels are economical for you, and whether it's a good option compared to other options. Because, okay, you should always assume that someone who wants to do an action, to carry out an action in terms of energy efficiency or sustainability, has a limited budget. So you cannot do much. You have to compare something with something else. And at least the basics of how you should do this comparison can be found in the ECO2 content for someone who's willing to go step by step and follow this e-learning process.
And then we also add that the community is also a way to keep you motivated, because human being is not an island, we need each other. And so also at the Act4Eco community, you can find somebody else. I mean, you can, and it can be by interest, or it can be by your geographical position where you are in the country.
Yeah. I was actually talking with a Danish, or it's actually an international NGO, but in Denmark, and they were accusing Act4Eco to be a little bit individualistic. Why are we looking at the individual, what the individual is doing? That's why it's important to also focus on the political level, on the community. And then I was thinking, Liazzat, how far do you think we had been coming with closing the hole in the ozone layer if it was up to the individual person to stop buying the wrong hairspray?
Can you please repeat the question?
I mean, if there hadn't been any protocols, if there hadn't been like a political initiative, do you think we had succeeded on individual level to go where we are now when it comes to closing the ozone hole?
Well, I think the political cloud that the Montreal Protocol, Vienna Convention have provided was very important also for the actions at the individual level. So unfortunately, if it was not for the efforts of the Montreal Protocol, the scientific predictions say that by this time we would have had a very little ozone layer left that would be protecting the planet and the natural resources on which depend on our health from the deadly UV radiation. And maybe in terms of the discussion we had about clean energy, if I would to the points that also was raised previously, I would like to say that at this demand side, at individual action level, it's very important to focus on energy efficiency, and this is where individual action is very important. Of course, the policy, the choice editing in terms of what products consumers can find available in their markets, but also the behavior of individuals is very important. It's important, of course, to focus on provision of the clean energy, renewable energy, but energy efficiency is a very important aspect and something that needs to be integrated more and more, especially in the economic stimulus packages that are coming up post-COVID to revive the economies. So the energy efficiency, if you look at the reports by International Energy Agency, they're saying it's one of the most cost-effective solutions actually to climate change.
I have
to bring to this demand side of this discussion.
Yeah, I have another question for you, Liazzat, because this is, so Act4Eco is a EU project under the Horizon 2020. And so, for example, do you have this, have the energy label?
Yes, I do have the energy label.
Because that is one thing, for example, all consumers use. I had to buy a new dishwasher, and that was one thing I looked upon. And
we heard that this is the old one. Apparently there's coming a new one. You saw it here first.
Yeah. My question to you, Liazzat, is also, you are based in Bangkok and you work at a worldwide level. Can you see something? So you have the outside look at Europe. Can you see something going on in Europe which can sort of push this energy conscious movement?
Yes, thank you for this question very much. We of course have our work has a very much global perspective. Being a convention, we work with all different parties, not only developing countries, but also developed. And the level of the European Union and the European Commission has put forward a number of important regulations that sometimes also serve as a model, if you like, or an example of how certain obligations or commitments of the countries in terms of environmental sustainability can be implemented at the country level. So at the EU level, there is a F-gas regulation, which is already focusing on the phase out of these HFC gases, which I mentioned, used as refrigerants and not ozone depleting substances, but quite harmful greenhouse gases. So, and under this umbrella of the F-gas regulation, there are important linkages also with energy efficiency and climate change, and general climate change policies. Maybe our colleague from Greece can add more on this. But of course, energy efficiency, the label that you showed, is very important. Also, we see it as a policy tool, which can guide individual behavior of the population in general, because these are based on the minimum energy performance standards, and then the labels, usually this color coding is perceived by consumers as the most easy to follow and to understand in terms of what they have to choose.
So the colors here on
labeling, it's one of the most important policy measures that is recommended in terms of achieving improvements in the area of energy efficiency.
I have a question also about, so Liazzat, you talked about also a lot of how the air cons are being serviced is important for how much gases they let out. And Sotiris, so also a lot of it also, it's not just chemicals or carbon emission, it's also about how we use these appliances. For example, in my house, I have a tendency to, I always have to charge my phone, and then I leave the charger in the socket in the wall. Sotiris, also, I know we have an action at the Act4Eco about the rebound effect. Can you tell me about what is the rebound effect?
Yes. Before that, let me say something about the labels. We have in ECO2 content about the labels and what the labels actually mean. Okay, because you see A plus, etc. First of all, the idea behind ECO2 is that you can use labels in this case better if you understand how they were derived. So we explain a bit the concept. We explain that labels are useful where you compare two similar pieces of equipment, but not so much in absolute terms. And we also explain a bit that behind A plus, etc., and depending on the equipment we are talking about, there is a correspondence between the letter and some form of an efficiency factor or coefficient. And okay, with some basic calculations, you can actually have an idea of what is that you save going from one class to the other in terms of kilowatt hours, and you can easily translate this into euros per year saved. So it's a trade-off to see if it makes sense to buy a better, a more efficient class. Okay, regarding rebound. Okay, rebound is actually the toughest part of the whole discussion of energy efficiency in general. We do have a part of the ECO2 content where we frame rebound as an idea that says, okay, if you can achieve to reduce your energy consumption, then maybe think in terms of energy sufficiency. Think in terms of not expanding your needs so that these savings are evaporated. But this should not always be the case. Huh? I mean, you could also have cases where I'm thinking energy poverty here. We actually struggle to achieve a good heating environment. So after some intervention, now you should be allowed to increase your consumption rate. In terms of things that we tend to do in our daily lives, that changing a bit of what we do can actually have some small impact. Also, there is content related to everyday consumption, and this also includes this concept of forgetting to unplug things. So, okay, it's actually the easiest part. It's very easy to have a list of 1 to few things that are very easy to implement and have some small but nevertheless no zero impact on your energy consumption. And this can be found in the comment.
Do you have any percentage? So for example, if I let my TV stay on standby always, for example, and I always leave the chargers plugged in, do you have any, can you say any idea how much? I mean, is it 5%? Can I save 5% if I started actually turning it off and unplugging the chargers?
Okay. First, I don't have the numbers, by heart. If you say 5%, 5% of total or 5% of the TV's consumption?
Well, it's 5% of my total in electricity.
No, total, I would say.
It's not 5%.
It's more.
Yeah. I have a question. Yeah, but we're going a little bit. We're going a little bit back. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So we're asking about the Montreal Protocol. How do we ensure that the countries who signed are following the protocol? Is there an ozone police? Do they go to ozone jail?
Yeah, it's a very good question. As I mentioned, this is a legally binding agreement, so which means that parties or countries that sign up to the protocol, they need to fulfill certain obligations. One of them is reduction and actually removal of the use of these substances. And there are a number of mechanisms that are put in place to monitor the compliance of the countries with the Montreal Protocol. So as I mentioned, each country would have a schedule by which they have to achieve certain percentage in terms of reduction. They do it gradually, not all at once. And each year they have to report the consumption data to the Secretariat, to where I work. And actually my formal role, my title is a compliance monitoring officer. So we have an implementation committee that looks at the compliance by parties. So it's a specific mechanism that was set up, agreed by parties and set up under the Montreal Protocol, and to really check them, the data that's submitted annually by parties, if it's in line with their commitments, annual commitments, and then if it's not, then we usually have a number of procedures which we usually with parties to help them to return, as we say, to compliance, meaning return to having that level of consumption that they agreed with. And in addition, as I mentioned, it's helpful that, especially for developing countries that might often not have this as a priority in the range of their national policy priorities that they have, there is a specific funding support that is provided, which makes their life and work easier in terms of controlling and reducing the use of these substances in the economies. And another important mechanism that we have in place under the Montreal Protocol, again agreed and adopted by all the parties that are members, is to have a licensing system for trading in these substances, because these substances are produced only in few countries and they're largely traded. So if the European Union, maybe Denmark, needs these substances, they probably would import it from another country. And usually this import and export is controlled also through a licensing system.
That actually leads me to another question here. Yeah. Let me just see if I can find it. With regards, and this is so it fits in all of the aspects here, because it's regard with labels and trade, I guess. We have a Sophia here who's writing, with regards to the labels, I've seen products labeled ozone friendly or HCFC free. So there's labels that shows that it's not harming the ozone layer. She's asking if there's other things she can look for.
Well, as we mentioned, the energy efficiency is another important label that helps you to decide which appliance would consume less energy through its life cycle. Another important label, and I think we discussed with Anna and Charlotte, is European flour, which is another important policy measure that is implemented at the level of European Union through the European Commission. It's a label that is given to the best performing in terms of the environmental performance products in the market. And I think they also cover air conditioners and refrigerators.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I have tons of questions. I'm just trying to
Go
see
ahead.
when they're fitting in. I had a question about what about refrigerants used in car air condition systems? Are they, how are they, can we use them now? Or how does it work?
Subject to the, we call it mobile air conditioning, is also one of the product types that is where these substances are used and also controlled under the framework of the Montreal Protocol. So currently most of the automobile industry is using HFCs, but there are alternatives that are being developed which takes them to more greener spectrum in terms of their ozone depleting potential and also green global warming potential.
So we talked about the rebound effect, that so when you start saving energy, you say to yourself, well, then it doesn't matter. I don't have to turn off the lights because I've installed LED lights in my house, and then in the end you just consume the same level of electricity. You also, Liazzat, you also talked about when we talked yesterday, we talked about that there is also in regards to consumption, you can also look at, so it's not only, it doesn't, so what I'm trying to say is that trying to mitigate the CO2, so trying to diminish the carbon CO2 footprint and trying to not using all these cooling agents can actually go hand in hand. You talked about the cold chain. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, we I think discussed also as a part of the individual action is consumption choices that consumers would make in their supermarkets when they buy products. So we were discussing that certain products have a higher environmental footprint through their life cycle from the farmer before they come to the supermarket. So this is one important aspect, because food product would have impacts both on climate and the ozone depletion indirectly through the refrigeration systems that are used to preserve them. So I think this is quite an important aspect also to keep in mind. For example, it depends very much on the context and of the country. So where I live in Thailand, in Bangkok, we import a lot of frozen berries that are quite popular, especially to be used in smoothies because it's quite hot. So we use a lot of ice in smoothies. And these frozen berries are usually imported from other countries, Europe, for example. So then the whole cold chain system, this refrigeration infrastructure that is used to preserve the berries in their frozen state before they arrive to a supermarket in Thailand is quite an important aspect to consider. And vice versa, maybe in the context of Denmark, could be some tropical fruits that potentially would have a higher environmental impact if you compare to the local products.
Grapes from South Africa, or green beans from Peru, for example, everything, or asparagus flown in from Peru. It's the same thing. You have to have that cold chain all the steps of the way, right?
So yes, you just have to bear in mind that most probably when it arrived, it has been in some kind of cold chain system equipment that help to preserve this product to the acceptable sanitary levels.
Yeah, and it's funny also to hear about food now from your side, because that's also something that we've been talking about in Act4Eco about that we are going to look at other causes to the climate crisis and look into other problematics that we could maybe also solve, but that would be after the end of the EcoTalk project, which is the project Act4Eco is funded under currently. So we're very much looking also for collaborators who could be interested in looking into some of these other problematics and would like to add some other learning or other actions on Act4Eco. And it's just funny how it all goes hand in hand, I think.
It does. Yeah. When do we have more questions you want to ask our experts?
Yeah, but I was listening too much. So yeah, I have a question here from Mass. What hinders the future implementation and continuation of Montreal Protocol? So it's a little bit the opposite question of what I asked before. Yeah, what would stand in a way for it to continue?
Of course, there are many factors that would impact the implementation of the Montreal Protocol. As I mentioned, that we have achieved the success, but this success needs to be sustained. So one of the important issues is use of the substances, and we need to understand that there is a growing demand for cooling, especially in the context of developing countries, growing economies, the hot climates. So there is a quite exponential growth demand for air conditioning equipment and also refrigeration equipment, because AC fridges would be the first thing that middle class consumers would buy once they can afford it. So, and this creates demand for these gases, but at the same time we are phasing out some of these gases. So there is a quite big scope for illegal trade. So it's one of the pillars and aspects, if you like, of the implementation of the Montreal Protocol, how to avoid the illegal trade in these substances that often imported to the country, mislabeled as a green alternative, but in fact inside the container it still has ozone depleting substances, and if then it's not properly used, then of course eventually will end up being in the atmosphere. So I think this diligence and cooperation at the national and international level is very important.
Now we're talking about politics. Is there also a political dimension to Act4Eco, Sotiris?
Political dimension. Okay, there is an attempt, a planned attempt, to have a feedback from the users, which represent consumers, to policy making. So we plan to have actions that are a bit collaborative and allow consumers to express opinions and provide ideas that could then become policy recommendations as a result of the project. And the idea behind that is that, okay, we have talked about energy know-how, you can explain different things and different options. Okay, assuming that the investment capital, if it's needed, it's not an issue. Maybe there are other aspects, other obstacles in terms of implementing actions that improve energy efficiency for the consumers. And maybe consumers, it's one individually, are better able to identify what is this hindering factor. And by getting this feedback, we can actually compile it into some higher policy level recommendations. So yes, there is this aspect.
So the platforms, the Act4Eco.eu is not only an e-learning platform, and it's not only a community, it is also public engagement where we, the partners, will draw the information. So the participants, what they provide us of information, we will feed it back into a political loop. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The crowdsourcing of.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions, Anna?
Yes. So Liazzat, we're asking about, but I think perhaps because now we talked about the everyday things we could do in order to live more energy efficient, but we also have a question from Desislava, who is asking if there is any everyday simple routines to adopt to protect the ozone layer.
As I mentioned, yes, so there are quite a lot of awareness material that is provided to help us as individuals at our level to act in terms of protection of the ozone layer. So maybe I have here in front of me some of them. I can. These are also available on our website, Ozone Secretariat website, if you just Google it. But for example, when you use, as I mentioned earlier, much earlier, that fridges and also especially air conditioners need to be serviced from time to time. So it would be important to call technicians or the workshops that provide these services where they have properly certified technicians who know how to do this in an environmentally friendly way. And you can also, these systems actually, in terms of ozone layer depletion, the main impact happens from the leakages from these gases. So I think this servicing part is quite important, and the installation part. But the key impact which consumers at individual level can control is use and behavior. So starting from the level of the temperature that you set for your thermostats, knowing that the higher you put, and usually for the human comfort, thermal comfort, you would need about 24 degree, 25 degree Celsius. So that would be quite already good contribution for the saving the energy, electricity, and indirectly also curbing the climate change impacts on these gases.
So I'm thinking, I have a friend in Colombia, and I was in her country house, like super far out in the middle of nowhere with like horses around, and there was this really cool old refrigerator. I don't know, it was with wooden, it had wood outside, wooden panels refrigerator. I've never seen anything like it before. And at first I was thinking like, oh, but that might be actually really good, because then where we maybe would have exchanged this refrigerator like 6 or 7 times. Meanwhile, here in Colombia, this refrigerator is just exactly the same. So there is, so in that aspect, it might be better for the environment. And then in the other, I don't know, how is it with, like, actually from both sides, would it be better to get a new one, or yeah?
Most probably still using CFC, so from the ozone layer depletion side, it would be better to replace it. But then, of course, from the resource efficiency, energy efficiency, also from energy efficiency side, I guess it would be better to replace it. But from the resource efficiency side, yeah, we focus more on the reuse and recycling. So it's a bit of a trade-off to be made.
Yeah,
but when you change an old model using CFC gases, then you have to get rid of it in a responsible way. I mean, you cannot just throw it out.
Yes, that's true. The disposal part is quite important, because then it happens often that we replace this equipment with new models that we think are more environmentally friendly in terms of the use of the gases, maybe more energy efficient. But then what happens to that equipment is very important also in terms of the proper waste management systems in the community and the country level.
Yeah, I have a question more for Sotiris. This is, I think it's a bit a funny question. I didn't think about this before, but we have a question here. Is producing your own energy safe, given that there is a discussion of health risk, for example, lung cancer, by increasing indoor radon exposure? Do you get more radon from producing your own energy, or yeah?
I've never heard of it. I think radon, where it is an issue, comes from basements and the soil. Radon from producing your own energy, by what means? Solar PV?
Yeah. Okay. So that's not an issue.
No, it sounds like it.
Well, I've never heard of it.
Okay. I think that's answer enough.
Do you have any more questions?
We have a comment about the energy labels, that there is a lot of EU countries that have their own energy labels.
Yeah.
That's a comment.
Okay, do you know anything about that, Sotiris, about the energy labels at a national level?
No, I think what I can tell you, for this is an aspect that you have to see it in front of you. In Greece, the labels are translated, the templates that come from the EU. The only country that I know is the UK. The UK has their own coding approaches. But even if there are national labels, they should complement and not replace. Because every country has accepted the obligation to adopt the labels. So it's not a replacement.
Yeah, but that's all the European countries, right?
European in terms of EU, European Union, or European geographical sense?
The energy label, or is it international? That's the EU label, no?
European Union.
If we're talking about European Union, yes, you have to have it, no matter what. If there are countries that have an additional, it's supplementary. There's no replace.
I would like to go back to the Act4Eco platform, just to also talk about. So we are an EU project with how many partners do we have?
We have 9 partners. We are Denmark, Greece, Italy, Finland, Portugal, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Ireland, Denmark. Did I say Denmark? We're from Denmark. Yes.
And so what can you find on the website? I mean, what if, so for example, I don't know, some people are maybe not that fluent in English.
Yeah, we have currently translations, great translations out there, partners, on the different actions. And we're going to work towards getting 2 other partners also on board. We already have French integrated. That's going to be Belgium. So we're going to see Belgic, French. How does it fit with the French?
Okay.
Can we just, yeah.
And Ireland, we forgot to mention Ireland.
Ireland is very important.
Belgium.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? No. I think we should round it up. So if there is any take-home message from this talk, Sotiris, what do you think? What is most important for the viewers to take home from this webinar?
To visit the Eco2 platform. And yeah, okay, because the Act4Eco platform. Because there are a lot of things that I think are there to learn and to implement, and also it would be really interested if people that go to the platform and go through the content then provide us with feedback in terms of what they feel is missing. Okay, because maybe there is an aspect that we haven't, that is related to energy efficiency. Okay, and we haven't thought of it. And if there is a need, it would be good to implement it before the project ends.
Yeah, so it's also important to say that the project will finish, but not the platform. The platform is going to stay. We're going to find some partners who will keep it alive, and we are working on making it, as you said, also on other areas. And again, it will function also as a feedback to the politicians and policymakers. Liazzat, do you have any take-home messages from our talk today?
Well, I would like to say thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I enjoyed it. And well, I guess from the Montreal Protocol on this important day is an international multilateral treaty that could serve as inspiration, I guess, to all of us that when we come together as countries, as states, and also, of course, the states could not have done it without efforts of everyone. We could patch a hole in the sky. So I guess with this spirit, we can also hope to address other issues that we have at hand.
Yes, thank you. Yes, exactly. It's a day for celebration because it really gives us hope. And even though the climate crisis is really, really complicated, and it also addresses the fact that we can act together, and we can act both as individuals, as a local community, but also at a national level and also as the international community.
And if you sit out there as an individual or an organization or a company and is thinking, oh, that sounds interesting, then you can write me on Teams at Act4Eco.eu, and we'll talk together and see if perhaps you can become a part of the partnership as well.
Yeah.
And I also want to say thank you, all of you, for participating today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.